There are some things a man sees that change him forever, that draw a line between who he was before and who he becomes after. I saw such a thing on a summer night in 1937 on a dirt road 3 miles outside of Harlan, Kentucky. I was 24 years old, and I thought I understood the world. I thought I knew what was real and what was not, what was possible and what could not be. I was wrong. What I encountered that night has stayed with me for 52 years, and in all that time, I have never spoken of it to another living soul. Not to my wife, who shared my bed for 47 years. Not to my sons, who think they know their father. Not even to the priest, though I have confessed lesser sins 100 times over. My name is Daniel Joseph Macklin. I was born in January of 1913 in a small house on the outskirts of Harlan, Kentucky, in the heart of coal country. My father was a coal miner, as his father had been before him. My mother died when I was 7 years old, from pneumonia that took her in the space of 3 days. After that, it was just my father and me and my 2 younger brothers living in a house that always felt too empty without her. We were poor, though no poorer than anyone else in Harlan in those days. The mines provided work, and work provided food and shelter, and that was about as much as anyone could ask for. My father worked underground 6 days a week, and on Sundays he rested and drank and tried to forget what it was like to spend his days in the dark. I left school after the 8th grade and went to work in the mines myself. I was 14 years old, small for my age, but strong enough to do what was asked of me. I worked as a trapper first, opening and closing the ventilation doors for the coal cars. Later, I worked at the face, loading coal alongside men twice my age. By the time I was 24, I had been working underground for 10 years. I knew the darkness of the mines as well as I knew the back of my own hand. I knew the smell of coal dust and timber and the sweat of men who worked too hard for too little. I knew the sound of the roof settling overhead and the feeling of being half a mile beneath the surface of the earth, surrounded by rock and dark and silence. I was engaged to be married that summer of 1937. Her name was Catherine O'Brien, and she was the daughter of a grocer in town. She had red hair and green eyes, and a laugh that made me forget, for a moment, the weight of the world I carried. We had been courting for 2 years, and we planned to marry in the fall, after the harvest was in and the worst of the summer heat had passed. I remember feeling that summer as though my life was finally taking the shape I had always hoped it would. I had work. I had Catherine. I had a future that seemed, if not bright, at least solid and real. I remember feeling certain about things. I remember believing I knew the difference between what was real and what was not. Harlan was a coal town through and through. Everything about it, the houses, the stores, the churches, the people, existed because of the mines. When the mines were working, the town thrived. When the mines were idle, the town suffered. It was as simple as that. The town itself sat in a narrow valley surrounded by steep, forested hills. A single main street ran through the center, lined with a few stores, a post office, 2 churches, and several buildings that served various functions for the mining company. Most of the houses were company houses, simple wooden structures that all looked more or less the same, built on company land and rented to company workers. The company owned everything in Harlan, the houses, the store, even the land beneath the cemetery. If you worked for the company, which nearly everyone did, you lived in a company house, bought your food at the company store with scrip instead of real money, and hoped you earned enough to pay your rent and feed your family. If you fell behind, the company could put you out on the street. If you complained too loudly, the company could blacklist you from working in any mine in the county. It was not a system designed to give a man much freedom, but it was the only system we had. Our house was one of these company houses, a small, weathered building with 4 rooms and a front porch that sagged in the middle. My father had lived there since before I was born, and after he died in a roof collapse when I was 21, I stayed on, paying the company rent with the wages I earned working the same mine that had killed him. The house sat on a lot that was perhaps 30 feet wide and 40 feet deep. There was a small yard in front, bare dirt mostly, where nothing much would grow because of the coal dust that settled over everything. In back, there was a pump for water and a small shed where we kept tools and firewood. The outhouse was at the far corner of the lot, shared with the family next door. Inside, the house was simple and spare. A front room with a stove for heat and cooking, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen area that was really just an extension of the front room, with a table and chairs and shelves for dishes. The walls were bare wood, never painted. The floors were rough planks that creaked when you walked on them. In winter, you could see your breath inside until the stove had been burning for an hour. But it was shelter, and it was mine, as long as I kept working and paying rent, and that was more than some people had. My younger brothers had both left Harlan by the time I was 24. One went to Detroit to work in the automobile factories. The other went to Cincinnati and found work on the railroads. They sent money home when they could, but mostly they just sent letters telling me I should leave too, that there was nothing for me in Harlan but coal dust and an early grave. But I stayed, partly because I did not know any other life, and partly because of Catherine. My days followed a predictable rhythm that varied little from week to week. I woke before dawn to the sound of the mine whistle, a long, low blast that echoed through the valley and told every miner in Harlan that it was time to get up and get ready for the shift. I would dress in the dark, pulling on the same clothes I had worn the day before, still stiff with dried sweat and coal dust. I would eat a quick breakfast of cornbread and coffee, pack a lunch of bread and beans in my dinner pail, and then walk to the mine with the other men from my section of town. We walked in groups of 3 or 4, mostly silent in the pre-dawn darkness, our boots crunching on the gravel road, our breath visible in the cold morning air. No one spoke much. What was there to say? We were all going to the same place to do the same work we had done yesterday and would do again tomorrow. The mine entrance was a black hole cut into the side of the mountain with a wooden head frame above it and rails leading down into the darkness. We would gather outside, waiting for the cage to come up from the previous shift, stamping our feet to stay warm, smoking cigarettes, checking our carbide lamps. When the cage arrived, a metal platform perhaps 10 feet square, surrounded by a low railing, we would crowd onto it, 20 or 30 men packed together, and the operator would pull the lever, and we would drop into the earth. The descent took several minutes, and you could feel the temperature change as you went down, the air growing warmer and damper. You could hear the cables creaking overhead and the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. You could smell the coal and the timber and the damp rock. At the bottom, we would step off the cage into the main tunnel, a space perhaps 10 feet high and 12 feet wide, supported by massive timber beams. Electric lights hung every 30 feet or so, casting pools of yellow light in the darkness. From the main tunnel, smaller tunnels branched off in every direction, leading to the working faces where men were cutting coal from the seam. I worked in a crew of 6 men. Our section was about half a mile from the main shaft, down a tunnel that grew progressively smaller until you had to stoop to walk through it. At the face, where the coal seam was exposed, we worked in a space no more than 4 feet high, kneeling or lying on our sides, using picks and shovels to break the coal free and load it into cars that would be pulled out to the main tunnel by mules. The work was brutal and dangerous. The air was thick with coal dust that got in your lungs and your eyes and your throat. The roof overhead was constantly settling, groaning and cracking, and you learned to listen for the sounds that meant trouble. Cave-ins happened regularly. Men were crushed or buried. Others were killed by gas explosions or by falling rocks, or by the 1,000 other hazards that came with working half a mile underground. We worked for 10 hours, with a brief break at midday to eat our cold lunch in the darkness. Then we would load back onto the cage and ride up to the surface, blinking in the daylight like men emerging from a tomb. In the evenings, I would walk home through the gathering dusk, my body aching, my lungs burning from the dust. I would wash up at the pump behind the house, scrubbing the worst of the coal dust from my hands and face and neck, though it never came completely clean. The dust got into the pores of your skin, into the creases of your hands, under your fingernails. Old miners had hands that were permanently stained black, no matter how much they scrubbed. Then I would eat a simple supper, beans and cornbread usually, or potatoes and whatever meat I could afford. Once or twice a week, I would walk into town to see Catherine. Those walks were the best part of my life in those days. The road from my house to town was 3 miles of packed dirt that wound through the hills and along the edge of a creek. In the summer, the evening air was warm and soft, and the trees were green and full, and the sound of the creek was a constant soothing presence. I would walk slowly, in no hurry, letting the peace of the evening wash away the grime and exhaustion of the day underground. I would arrive at Catherine's house just as the sun was setting, and we would sit together on the porch swing, talking about the wedding and about the life we would build together. She wanted children, at least 3. She wanted a house with a real garden, not just a patch of dirt behind a company house. She wanted me to find work that did not take me underground, though we both knew that was unlikely in a place like Harlan. I loved listening to her talk about these things. I loved the way her eyes lit up when she described the future she imagined for us. She spoke of curtains she would make for the windows, of a chicken coop we would build, of teaching our children to read before they went to school. And even though I knew that most of her dreams were probably beyond our reach, I did not discourage her. I wanted to believe, as she did, that our life together would be better than the lives we had known. On Sundays, I went to Mass at St. Joseph's, the Catholic church on the north side of town. It was a small, plain building with wooden pews and a simple altar, but it was the spiritual center of the Irish and Italian families who had come to Harlan to work in the mines. I was not particularly devout. My father had been a believer, but his faith had died with my mother, and I had inherited his skepticism more than his belief. But I went to church because it was expected, because Catherine expected it, because it was part of the rhythm of life in a small town. After Mass, if the weather was good, I would sometimes walk up into the hills and spend the afternoon alone, just sitting and thinking and looking out over the valley. From up there, you could see the whole town spread out below, the company houses in their neat rows, the main street with its few stores, the mine buildings with their dark head frames. You could see the smoke rising from 100 chimneys, and you could hear faintly the sounds of life below. I liked the solitude. I liked being away from the noise and the people and the constant reminder of the mines. Up in the hills, I could breathe air that was not thick with coal dust. I could think about things other than work and rent and the future. It was a simple life, a hard life, but it was my life, and I thought I understood it. I thought I knew its boundaries and its possibilities. I thought I knew what was out there in the world and what was not. I thought the road to town was just a road, a strip of dirt that connected one place to another, with nothing on it but trees and rocks and the occasional wagon. I thought the night sky was just empty space and distant stars. I thought reality was solid and unchanging and comprehensible. I remember that certainty very clearly. It was a Saturday in late July, hot and humid in the way that summer in the Kentucky hills can be. The air was thick and still, heavy with moisture, and by mid-afternoon the heat had settled over the valley like a blanket. I had worked the morning shift at the mine, and by the time I came up at noon, I was exhausted and filthy and ready to be done for the day. I walked home, ate a quick meal of leftover beans and bread, and then spent the rest of the afternoon trying to stay cool. I sat on the porch with my shirt off, drinking water from the well and watching the sky for any sign of rain that might break the heat. By evening, the temperature had dropped slightly, and I decided to walk into town to see Catherine. We had no specific plans. I had not told her I was coming, but I knew she would be home, and I wanted to see her. I wanted to sit with her on the porch and talk about nothing in particular and forget, for a few hours, about the heat and the mine and the ache in my back. I washed up at the pump, put on a clean shirt, and set out just as the sun was beginning to sink toward the western hills. The road to town was familiar to me. I had walked it hundreds of times, and I knew every turn and rise and dip along the way. The evening was beautiful despite the heat. The light had that golden quality it gets in summer when the sun is low, and the shadows were long and soft. I could hear the creek running alongside the road, and I could hear birds settling into the trees for the night, and there was a peacefulness to the world that made me feel almost content. I walked at a steady pace, not hurrying, enjoying the coolness of the evening air after the oppressive heat of the day. I passed the old Miller place, abandoned since the family had moved to Ohio. I passed the turnoff to the Henderson farm, where I could see smoke rising from the chimney even in July, because Mrs. Henderson was baking bread. I passed the spot where the road crossed over a small wooden bridge that spanned the creek. Everything was normal. Everything was as it should be. I had no sense that anything was about to change. I was perhaps a mile and a half from town, walking through a stretch of road where the trees grew thick on both sides and the canopy overhead blocked most of the fading light, when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a vehicle ahead of me on the road. I could see something dark and large, perhaps 50 yards ahead, blocking most of the width of the narrow road. I assumed it was a truck or a wagon that had broken down, and I prepared to help whoever was stranded there. But as I got closer, I realized it was not a vehicle. It was something else. I stopped walking when I was about 30 yards away, trying to understand what I was seeing. The thing was sitting in the middle of the road, completely still. It was large, perhaps 12 feet tall and 15 or 20 feet wide at the base. It had a shape that I can only describe as dome-like, or maybe bell-shaped, with a curved top that tapered down to a wider bottom. The surface was smooth and dark, darker than the shadows around it, almost black, but with a faint sheen to it like polished metal or wet stone. There were no wheels, no legs, no visible means of support. It simply sat there on the road, as if it had been placed there deliberately. I stood perfectly still, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. My first thought was that it was some kind of equipment from the mine that had been abandoned or lost. But I had never seen anything like it at the mine. This was not a coal car or a piece of drilling equipment. This was something completely unfamiliar. The air around me had changed. I noticed it suddenly. The sounds of the evening had stopped. The birds were silent. The creek, which I should have been able to hear from where I stood, made no sound. Even the insects, which had been buzzing and chirping moments before, were quiet. The silence was absolute and unnatural. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest despite the warmth of the evening. I wanted to turn around and walk away, but I could not move. I stood frozen, staring at this thing on the road, trying to make sense of it. And then, as I watched, something changed. A light appeared on the surface of the object, a soft, pale glow that seemed to emanate from within the material itself, rather than from any external source. The light was not bright, but it was clearly visible in the gathering dusk. It pulsed slowly, growing brighter and then dimmer, like the slow beating of a heart. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The light moved. It drifted across the surface of the object in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, almost purposeful. It traced a line from the top of the dome down to the base, then circled around the perimeter before fading away entirely. And then there was light beneath it. I do not know how else to describe it. The thing lifted, not high, perhaps only a foot or two, and beneath it, where it had been touching the road, there was light. A pale, bluish-white glow that illuminated the ground and cast strange shadows on the trees. I could see the road beneath it now, and I could see that the surface was undisturbed. There were no marks, no indentations, nothing to indicate that this massive object had been pressing down on the earth. It hovered there, motionless, glowing faintly from beneath. I tried to speak, to call out, to make some sound, but my voice would not come. My throat felt paralyzed. My legs were shaking so badly that I thought they might give out. The thing remained there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two. It did not move. It did not make a sound. It simply existed, impossible and undeniable, blocking the road and filling the air with that unnatural silence. And then it began to rise. It lifted straight up, slowly and smoothly, with no sound of machinery or engines or anything mechanical. It rose above the road, above the trees, ascending into the darkening sky, as if being pulled by invisible strings. As it climbed higher, the light beneath it grew brighter, and I could see it illuminating the underside of the canopy, casting strange patterns of light and shadow across the leaves. I tilted my head back and watched it go, my neck craned, my eyes straining to follow it. It rose higher and higher, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just a point of light among the first stars appearing in the eastern sky. And then it was gone. The silence broke all at once. The sounds of the evening rushed back, the creak, the insects, the rustling of leaves in a breeze I had not felt moments before. I could hear my own ragged breathing coming in short, gasping gulps. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the road, my whole body trembling. I sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where the thing had been, my mind struggling to process what I had just witnessed. I do not know how long I sat there on that dirt road, trying to understand what had just happened. The world around me had returned to normal. The sounds of evening, the movement of air, the fading light. But I felt as though I had been pulled out of reality and then dropped back into it, disoriented and shaken to my core. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My legs were unsteady, and I had to lean against a tree for support. My hands were shaking so violently that I could not control them. My heart was racing, pounding so hard in my chest that I could feel it in my throat. I looked down at the road where the thing had been. The surface was undisturbed. There were no marks, no burns, no evidence that anything unusual had happened there. The packed dirt looked exactly as it always did. I walked forward slowly, my steps hesitant, and examined the spot more closely. I knelt down and put my hand on the ground where the thing had hovered. The earth was cool and dry, unchanged. There was nothing to indicate that what I had seen had been real. But I knew it had been real. I stood up and looked around, half expecting to see someone else, some other witness who could confirm what I had seen. But the road was empty. The woods were quiet. I was alone. I thought about continuing into town, about going to Catherine's house and telling her what I had witnessed. I imagined sitting on her porch and describing the thing on the road. I imagined the look on her face, the concern, the disbelief, the worry. And I knew I could not do it. I knew she would think I was lying or mistaken or ill. She would think the heat had affected me, or that I had been drinking, or that I had imagined the whole thing. She might even think I was losing my mind. I could not bear the thought of her looking at me that way. So I turned around and walked back home, moving slowly, my legs still weak, my mind still reeling. When I reached the house, I sat on the porch steps and stared out into the darkness. I tried to pray, but the words would not come. I tried to think rationally, to find some explanation for what I had seen, but there was no rational explanation. I had witnessed something that should not exist, something that defied every law of nature I had been taught, something that proved the world was stranger and more mysterious than I had ever imagined. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, seeing the thing in my mind's eye, the dark dome, the pulsing light, the way it had lifted into the sky as if gravity meant nothing to it. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not speak of what I had seen. I would bury it deep inside myself and carry it alone. I would go on with my life as if it had never happened. But keeping the secret was harder than I had anticipated. The next day, I went to see Catherine. I sat with her on the porch, and she asked me why I had not come the night before. I told her I had not been feeling well, that I had decided to stay home and rest. She put her hand on my forehead, checking for fever, and asked if I was all right now. I told her I was fine, but I was not fine. I could feel the lie sitting between us like a wall. I could feel the distance it created, the separation it imposed. She was talking about the wedding, about the dress her mother was making, about the plans for the reception, and I was nodding and smiling and pretending to listen. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. I kept thinking about the thing on the road. I kept seeing it in my mind. The dark surface, the pulsing light, the way it had risen into the sky. I kept wondering what it was, where it had come from, why it had appeared on that particular road at that particular moment. And I kept wondering if I would ever see it again. Over the following weeks, I became withdrawn. Catherine noticed and asked me several times if something was troubling me. I told her I was just tired from work, just worried about money, just thinking about the future. She seemed to accept these explanations, though I could see the concern in her eyes. I went back to the spot on the road where I had seen the thing. I went there 3 times in the first week, walking out in the evening and standing on the exact place where it had hovered. I examined the ground, the trees, the road itself, looking for some evidence, some sign that would prove I had not imagined it. But there was nothing. The road looked exactly as it always had. I began to have trouble sleeping. I would lie awake at night, replaying the encounter in my mind, examining every detail, trying to find some explanation that would make sense. But there was no explanation. There was only what I had seen, and what I had seen was impossible. I thought about telling someone, my priest, perhaps, or one of the older men at the mine who had lived long enough to have seen strange things. But every time I imagined speaking the words aloud, I heard how they would sound. Crazy, unbelievable, the ramblings of a man who had been in the mines too long. So I stayed silent. The summer passed, and Catherine and I were married in September, as we had planned. The wedding was small and simple, held at St. Joseph's, with our families and friends in attendance. I stood at the altar and said my vows, promising to love her and honor her and protect her. And even as I spoke those words, I knew I was holding something back. I knew there was a part of myself that I could not share with her, a secret that would always stand between us. We moved into a small house on the edge of town, and I continued working at the mine. Catherine found work taking in sewing and mending. We settled into the rhythms of married life, and to anyone looking from the outside, we seemed happy and ordinary. But I was not the same person I had been before that night on the road. Something inside me had changed. The world no longer felt solid and predictable. It felt fragile, uncertain, full of hidden depths and unseen possibilities. I looked at the sky differently. I looked at the darkness differently. I wondered what else might be out there, just beyond the edge of perception. And I carried the weight of what I had seen alone and in silence. Catherine and I had 3 sons over the next 10 years. I worked in the mines for another 23 years. until my lungs gave out and the doctor told me I could not go underground anymore. We raised our boys in Harlan, in that small house on the edge of town, and we built a life that looked from the outside like any other working-class life in coal country. But there was always a distance inside me, a part of myself that I held back, even from the woman I loved more than anyone in the world. Catherine noticed it, I think, though she never said so directly. There were times when she would look at me with a question in her eyes, as if she sensed that I was somewhere else, that some piece of me was unreachable. She would ask me what I was thinking, and I would say, "Nothing," or "Just work," and she would nod and let it go. But I know she wondered. I know she felt the wall between us, even if she could not name it or understand it. I was a good husband, I think. I provided for my family. I was faithful. I was present at the dinner table and at church on Sundays and at the boys' school functions. But I was not fully open. There was always something I kept locked away. As the years passed, the memory of that night became less sharp, less immediate. It faded the way old memories do, losing detail and color and clarity. But it never disappeared. It was always there, waiting in quiet moments to resurface. I would be driving home from work, and I would pass the spot on the road where it had happened, and I would slow down and look, even though I knew nothing would be there. I would be lying in bed at night, unable to sleep, and I would remember the silence that had fallen over the world, and I would listen to the night sounds, half expecting them to stop. I would be sitting on the porch on a summer evening, watching the stars come out, and I would remember the way the thing had risen into the sky, and I would search the darkness for something that should not be there. The secret became a part of who I was. It shaped the way I saw the world. It made me humble in the face of mystery. It made me skeptical of certainties and explanations that claimed to account for everything. When I heard people speak with absolute confidence about what was possible and what was not, I would think, "You do not know. You cannot know. The world is larger and stranger than you imagine." But I never said it aloud. Catherine died in 1984, at the age of 71. She had been sick for a long time, and we knew it was coming. But that did not make it any easier when it finally happened. I held her hand as she passed, and I whispered to her that I loved her, and I thought about telling her the truth, about finally speaking the secret I had carried for 47 years. But I did not. I let her go without ever knowing the full truth of who I was. After she died, I moved in with my middle son and his family. They take care of me now, though I can still take care of myself for the most part. They think of me as a simple man, a retired coal miner with simple thoughts and simple needs. They have no idea what I carry inside me. I am 76 years old now. My lungs are damaged from 33 years of breathing coal dust, and I wake each morning coughing until my ribs ache. My hands shake from the years of operating machinery underground. My vision is failing. I know I do not have much time left, and I have decided that I cannot die without speaking of what I saw. I do not expect anyone to believe me. I would not believe me if I were hearing this story from someone else, but I need to say it anyway. I need to put it into words, to give it form outside my own mind, to make it real in a way that it has never been real before. On a summer night in 1937, on a dirt road 3 miles outside of Harlan, Kentucky. I encountered something that should not have existed. It was a large dome-shaped object, dark and smooth, that sat in the middle of the road and then rose into the sky without making a sound. It defied gravity. It defied explanation. It defied everything I had been taught about the nature of reality. I have carried the memory of that encounter for 52 years. I have thought about it thousands of times. I have examined it from every angle, looking for some explanation that would make sense. But there is no explanation. There is only what I saw. I am writing this down now because I cannot bear to take it with me to the grave. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to hear this testimony and decide for themselves what it means. I do not know what the thing on the road was. I do not know where it came from or why it appeared there that evening. I do not know if anyone else has ever seen it or if I was the only witness to something that should not have been witnessed. But I know what I saw. And I know that I have lived my entire adult life in the shadow of that moment, carrying a secret that separated me from everyone I loved. That is the truth. That is my confession. Sometimes, when I cannot sleep, I think about that evening in July of 1937. I see myself walking along that familiar road, expecting nothing more than a pleasant evening with the woman I loved. I see myself stopping on the road, staring at something that could not be there but was, and I wonder, why me? Why that road? Why that moment? I have no answers. I do not know if the thing on the road was from some other world or some other dimension, or if it was something that has always been here, moving through our world unseen, except for those rare moments when it becomes visible. I do not know if it was aware of me, or if I was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. I do not know if it was the only one, or if there are others, moving through the night sky above us, invisible and unknowable. All I know is what I saw. I know that on a summer evening in 1937, something stopped me on the road to town. Something that defied explanation. Something that proved the world is far stranger than we are taught to believe. I am an old man now, and soon I will be gone. The people who knew me will remember me as a coal miner, a husband, a father. They will think they knew me, but they did not, because I carried a secret my entire life, and I never spoke of it until now. I saw something on the road that should not have been there, and I will die not knowing what it was,